Is it possible to build a jetpack using downward-firing rifles? I was sort of surprised to find that the answer was yes. The principle here is pretty simple. If you fire a bullet forward, the recoil pushes you back. So if you fire downward, the recoil should push you up. The first question we have to answer is, can a rapidly firing gun even lift its own weight? If a gun weighs 10 pounds but produces only 8 pounds of recoil when fired continuously, it won't be able to lift itself off the ground, let alone lift itself plus a person. In the aerospace world, the ratio of a craft's thrust to its weight is called its thrust-to-weight ratio. If it's less than 1, that is, if the thrust is less than the weight, the vehicle can't take off. The Saturn V had a thrust-to-weight ratio at takeoff of about 1.5. There are a lot of repeating firearms, but it turns out many of them also tend to come in at a thrust-to-weight ratio of around 1.5. This means if you stood one on end and remotely fired it, it would rise into the air while firing. The amount of thrust created by a rocket, or a rapidly firing gun, depends on two things: how much mass it's throwing out behind it, and how fast it's throwing that mass. A self-reloading firearm might weigh around 10 pounds. If you fire 10 10-gram bullets per second, going 700 meters per second, the thrust from the stream of bullets is around 15 pounds. But this is just the bullets. The actual thrust can be up to around 30% higher. The reason is that a rifle isn't just spitting out bullets. It's also ejecting hot gas and explosive debris, and the precise amount of extra force varies depending on the specific design of the rifle and the cartridge. The overall efficiency of using a rifle for propulsion also depends on whether you eject the shell casings out of the vehicle or carry them along with you. Let's assume we eject them for maximum efficiency. If we're firing bullets at the ground, we clearly have a complete lack of regard for the safety of anyone below us anyway. So what does all this mean for our jetpack? Well, a self-reloading rifle can take off, but it only generates about 5 extra pounds of thrust beyond its own weight. So it can't lift much more than a squirrel, let alone a human rider. Let's try multiple rifles. If one rifle can lift itself plus 5 extra pounds, then 2 rifles can lift 10 extra pounds. At this point, it's clear where we're headed. With 30 rifles, we can just barely lift the weight of a 150-pound person. They'll be able to hover, but not really rise into the air. 40 rifles will accelerate that person upward at 0.1 Gs. 60 rifles will get them to 0.2 Gs. If we add enough rifles, the weight of the passenger gets spread out over so many of them that it becomes irrelevant, and the craft's thrust-to-weight ratio approaches that of a single unburdened rifle. An upward acceleration of 5 meters per second squared, or about half a G. But that acceleration won't last very long because we have another problem. Ammunition. There's no advantage to carrying more than about 150 rounds of ammunition. The reason for this is a fundamental and central problem in rocket science. Fuel makes you heavier. Each bullet weighs 10 grams, and the cartridge might weigh around twice that. If we add more than about 150 rounds, the rifle becomes too heavy to carry. This suggests our optimal craft comprises a large number of rifles, ideally at least 300, carrying 150 rounds of ammunition each for about 15 seconds of continuous firing. This craft could accelerate upward to vertical speeds of around 80 miles per hour, and after it ran out of ammunition, fuel, it would continue coasting upward to a height of about 200 meters. So we've answered the question. With enough rifles, you could fly, but our rig is clearly not a practical jetpack. Can we do better? The GAU-8 Avenger is an autocannon, a giant self-reloading gun usually attached to a vehicle, that fires a 1-pound bullet up to 60 times a second. It produces almost 5 tons of recoil force, which is extraordinary considering it's mounted in a type of plane whose engines produce only a combined 8 tons of thrust. If you put 2 of these cannons in one aircraft and fired both of them forward while trying to take off, the guns would overpower the engines and you'd accelerate backward. To put it another way, if I mounted a GAU-8 Avenger on my car, put the car in neutral, and started firing backward from a standstill, I would be breaking the interstate speed limit in less than 3 seconds. As good as this autocannon would be as a jetpack engine, the Soviets built one that was even more powerful. The GSH-630 weighs half as much as the GAU-8 and has a higher rate of fire. Its thrust-to-weight ratio approaches 30, which means if you pointed one at the ground and fired, not only would it take off in a rapidly expanding spray of metal fragments, but you would experience 30 Gs of acceleration. This is far too much. In fact, even when it was firmly mounted in an aircraft, the acceleration was a problem. The recoil tended to inflict damage on the aircraft. Landing lights almost always broke after firing, and firing more than about 30 rounds in a burst was asking for trouble due to overheating. But if you somehow braced the human rider, made the craft strong enough to survive the acceleration, wrapped it in an aerodynamic shell, and ensured it was adequately cooled, with a GSH-630, you could jump over mountains,